HOA Karen blocks my driveway, so I dug a giant trench around it and put up a drawbridge. It's legal. I've lived in my house for over 10 years now, and up until recently, life in my quiet suburban neighborhood was peaceful. That was before Karen moved in across the street. You know the type: blonde bob haircut, overpriced yoga pants, and an inflated sense of self-importance because she's on the HOA board. At first, she was just a minor annoyance, sending passive-aggressive emails about lawn height and trash bins. But things took a turn for the worse when she started parking her car in front of my driveway, blocking me in completely. The first time it happened, I assumed it was a mistake. I politely knocked on her door and asked her to move. She rolled her eyes and sighed like I had asked her to donate a kidney. "Oh, relax," she said. "I was only inside for a few minutes." A few minutes? I had been stuck there for nearly half an hour. But I let it slide. The blocking escalates over the next few weeks. It kept happening. Sometimes, she would leave her SUV in my driveway for hours. Other times, she'd tell guests visiting her house that my driveway was extra parking for HOA members. I called the HOA president. He refused to help. "Karen is in charge of parking violations," he told me. "If she says it's fine, then it's fine." Frustrated, I called the police. They ticketed her car once, but then she just ignored the tickets. She even had the audacity to brag in the HOA Facebook group that she knew a guy at City Hall who made parking tickets disappear. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. It was a full-blown power move. That's when I decided, if I can't stop her from parking in my driveway, I'll make sure she'll never park there again. The master plan, a moat and drawbridge. I spent a weekend researching property laws, local ordinances, and HOA regulations. And I found a loophole. See, my driveway? It was private property. And under city zoning laws, I was free to modify my driveway as long as I didn't disrupt the sidewalk or road. So I did what any rational, frustrated homeowner would do. I rented an excavator. It was surprisingly easy. I hired a contractor to dig a 4-foot deep trench around my driveway, effectively turning it into an island. The moment the trench was completed, I set up a wooden drawbridge. Yes, an actual medieval-style drawbridge, leading from my garage to the street. When Karen saw it, her face turned red. "What the hell is this?" she screeched, storming up my driveway. "Oh, you mean my legally compliant property modification?" I said, smiling. "You can't do this. This is ridiculous." I checked the zoning laws. It's perfectly legal. And since you love parking here so much, I figured I'd make sure you could never do it again. She stormed off, furious. Karen tries to fight back over the next few weeks. She tried everything to get me to undo my trench project. First, she called the HOA. The president came by, looked at my permit approvals, and left with a disappointed sigh. Then she called the city. An inspector came, looked at the paperwork, and confirmed that I hadn't broken any laws. "It's odd," he admitted, "but technically, he's in the clear." Finally, she tried calling the fire department, claiming my drawbridge was a fire hazard. But the inspector took one look at my manual crank system, which I had installed for emergency use, and said, "Actually, this is kind of genius." The sweet victory. Karen was furious. But what could she do? With her parking scam officially dead, she had no choice but to park in her own driveway like a normal person. I, on the other hand, now had the coolest driveway in the entire neighborhood. Kids loved it. Neighbors thought it was hilarious. Even the local news station did a small segment on my medieval parking revenge. As for Karen, she eventually moved out a few months later. Apparently, the neighborhood had become too hostile for her liking. Moral of the story? Never mess with someone who has time, patience, and a legally sound plan for revenge. Oh, and moats? Surprisingly effective. After Karen's initial meltdown, I figured the battle was over. But oh, how wrong I was. If there's one thing I underestimated, it was her sheer pettiness. Karen's revenge. The fake HOA violations. A week after the trench was completed, I received a letter from the HOA. Notice of violation. Unapproved structural modification. I nearly laughed. The HOA had zero authority over my driveway. I had already confirmed this with the city. But Karen, in her infinite pettiness, was trying to make my life miserable anyway. I walked over to her house, letter in hand, and knocked on the door. She opened it with her usual smug expression. "Oh, hello," she said, feigning innocence. "I got your little letter," I said, waving the notice. She smirked. "You violated HOA guidelines." "No, I didn't. The HOA has no jurisdiction over driveways, as confirmed by the city." She shrugged. Well, the HOA board is reviewing the complaint. You might get fined. You mean you were reviewing it? I'm on the board, she said sweetly. You'll be hearing from us soon. At this point, I realized she was going to weaponize the HOA against me. The HOA war begins for the next month. I started getting weekly violation letters. Your lawn is too long. It wasn't. Your house paint is not up to HOA standard. It was literally the same color as every other house. Your driveway trench poses a safety risk. It was fully permitted by the city. Each time, I responded with legal counterpoints. Each time, she failed to enforce a fine. But it didn't stop her. Then she got desperate. One morning, I woke up to construction crews at my house. Karen had hired a contractor to fill in my trench. The ultimate Karen move, I stormed outside. What are you doing? I shouted. A guy in a hard hat looked up from his excavator. We were told by the HOA to fill in the hazard. Hazard? I laughed. Who hired you? He pointed across the street. Karen stood there, arms crossed, watching like a victorious war general. You can't do this. I yelled. It's for safety, she said smugly. I pulled out my phone and called the police. The moment I mentioned the words illegal destruction of private property, the officer on the other end got very interested. 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Karen, still convinced she was untouchable, smirked at the officers. It's just an HOA issue, she said dismissively. The cop turned to me. You own the driveway? Yes, I said, handing over my property deed and city permits. The cop turned back to Karen. You authorized an unapproved modification on someone else's private property? It's an HOA mandate, she scoffed. That's not how the law works, the officer said, shaking his head. You're under investigation for trespassing and property damage. Karen's smug expression vanished. But I'm the HOA vice president, she stammered. That doesn't make you the law. The officer took her statement while I had her contractor stop work immediately. Not only that, but I got a copy of the invoice, which had her signature on it, approving the job. The legal blowback, Karen thought she was untouchable. But within a week, she was slapped with a cease and desist order from my lawyer, a fine for trespassing from the city, a bill for damages from me. And here's the best part. The HOA refused to back her up. Turns out, the president of the HOA didn't actually support Karen's actions. She had been operating alone, abusing her position. So, when she tried to get the HOA to cover her legal fees, they denied her. Then, at the next HOA meeting, a group of homeowners, myself included, voted to remove her from the board. Karen's final defeat with her HOA power gone, her parking scam dead, and a giant legal bill to pay, Karen put her house up for sale within 2 months. When she finally moved, I threw a huge neighborhood barbecue in celebration. And yes, the drawbridge stayed. To this day, whenever I pull my car out over the wooden bridge, I smile. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't just getting even, it's outsmarting a Karen at her own game.